Hey everyone, welcome to the Spoon Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Wolf, and on today's show, we have Anthony Sullivan, the Chief Product Officer for Fresco. If you don't know Fresco, you probably aren't super steeped in the world of technology that powers the future kitchen because they've been doing it for longer than probably anyone. They started about 10 years ago as a company named Dropped. They had their own connected smart kitchen scale that was in Apple stores and other locations. And from those learnings, they eventually evolved into a platform company, creating software and hardware that goes into other appliances and other devices that helps power connected kitchen experiences. And so we talk about that. We talk about this evolution of the company, some of the challenges of building this technology, and where we think it's all going. So it was a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And if this is something that you're really interested in, you'll definitely want to be at the Smart Kitchen Summit in Seattle in June. Go to smartkitchensummit.com to check it out. Fresco will be there, as well as other big companies like Whirlpool, GE Appliances, tons of startups to talk about this future kitchen in all its different dimensions. So it's going to be a great couple of days. I'd love to see you in person. Go to smartkitchensummit.com. Again, use the coupon code podcast to get 15% off tickets at checkout. All right, folks, that's it for now. Let's get to my conversation with Anthony. All right, on today's podcast, we'll be talking about one of my favorite topics, the smart kitchen and technology that's enabling that. And to do that, I have joining me today, Fresco's Chief Product Officer, Anthony Sullivan. How you doing, Anthony?
Very well, Michael. Thank you for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, it'll be great to talk about what's going on in the connected smart kitchen. Fresco has been a company that's, I call one of the OG companies in the space. You know, going back, they were called Drop. And I remember talking to Ben Harris back like maybe 10 years ago when they had their scale early days, but you guys have really evolved into what I would call more of a platform company, and you're using, the term kitchen operating system. So that really has been a significant change for the company over the past couple of years.
That's right. As you say, Ben founded Drop, I think more than 10 years ago now, and he's worked with appliance manufacturers ever since then, and so he's had a great kind of front row seat to kind of understand some of the challenges around how do you actually execute upon a smart strategy. Really, what we've done over the last 3 years is probably take a step back and think, how do we address that challenge that we see amongst appliance brands? And that's really was the origins to Kitchen OS. So we've built Kitchen OS really on behalf of the industry.
And you guys work with a lot of appliance manufacturers. And we're going to dive into that. What Kitchen OS is, what are some of the challenges of building an underlying software framework to connect all these different brands and types of appliances in the consumer cooking journey. But before we do that, just so that our listeners know a little bit more about you, you actually have been in the kitchen digital technology space for some time. Even before Fresco, you actually were at CookPad, which actually, if people don't know CookPad, it's one of the biggest cooking applications in the world. It has a huge community.
It's huge. So CookPad was founded, I think, probably close to 30 years ago. And in Japan, I think it still has 20 million weekly active users. So the whole idea was a cooking community, as you say. So you would actually learn to cook from people like you. So it was all about everyday cooking and making that a reality. And then so it's quite different from opening up glossy cookbooks and seeing great outcomes that are probably beyond reach. So the idea of a community was very powerful. And then it grew outside of Japan across the world, really. Very big in the Middle East, very big in Indonesia. And when I worked at CookPad, it was on the international expansion. So all the plans that we had outside of Japan.
Tens of millions of users. So it's always been interesting to me because it's also very cross-national. But turning to Fresco, I think is funny. I think it was because I've been following the company for the good part of a decade. And, I think I really noticed a big move towards becoming more of a platform company probably in the last 3 or 4 years from Fresco. And I think it was Steve Horowitz, one of the original guys behind Android, came on as an investor. I know that Ben talked a lot with him, and then bringing you on, you guys really doubled down on trying to build software frameworks that would power different cooking experiences across, appliance manufacturers like Panasonic and others. And so you talked about a step back. Talk about that step back and what you were thinking at that time.
Yeah, so Fresco, as I said, have been in the kind of the smart kitchen or connectivity in the kitchen for the best part of 10 years. And if I take it right back to what our mission is, so our mission is to help people cook more. And we talk internally about how to make perfect cooking simple, and delivering smart appliances is pretty complex. And this idea of making cooking simple, in our mind, means how do you orchestrate across a kitchen? And I think, the idea that to cook a meal you might need 3 or 4 different mobile apps, is never going to fly. That's not going to work. And so if you're really going to, realize the benefits of how smart can help people in the kitchen, then we had to take a step back, because what we needed to do was equip the industry to be able to bring appliances to market at speed. We think we built a platform that is the most cost-effective and fastest route for anyone to bring a smart appliance to market. But we also knew we had to create within that, a delightful cooking experience, and one that actually solved everyday cooking problems. And if we can't achieve that, then the technology is kind of in service to it. It's not really in service to anything. So they're the two things that we really kept top of mind. And so we had to go back and do some really deep thinking. And we'd learned a lot over the previous decade. We'd learned a lot from other manufacturers who'd shared their various war stories or the challenges that they had. And there was kind of three key things that we went back and had a look at. And one of them was to look at, what is a recipe? Which might sound kind of obvious, but there's many different ways of writing recipes, and that was something we needed to understand. So we analysed over 1 million recipes, believe it or not. We also needed to understand the capabilities of appliances. So we really studied, I think, close to 20 different types of kitchen appliance. And then we had to really understand what's involved in cooking. And that meant studying the history of cooking techniques. And that was the basis of thinking then about Kitchen OS. So we started to think then about capabilities. And so to really simplify it, an appliance is really a collection of capabilities. And a capability in our world is bake, broil, sous vide, pressure cook, air fry. And there's a set of those that's quite common, across many, many different types of appliances. And so once you understand capabilities and how they work, and once you understand recipes and how they're structured and how those two things come together, then we had really the heart of Kitchen OS.
I mean, you're talking to I think a lot of the challenges of a disparate universe of different cooking appliances built by brands with different user interfaces, etc. And then on the other side, the consumer and the cook who has all these different sources in which they're getting information. They're using different types of recipes in different formats. And it's just a very difficult area to try and build, I think, underlying software frameworks for. And that was the big challenge for you guys. So you got down to the basic bones of the situation and analyzed those three major things. And so once you kind of broke it down to that level, how did you start building Kitchen OS?
So once we broke it down to that level, then we were looking at designing an architecture that would enable us to scale. And it's not just looking at capabilities and how appliances work. Mm-hmm. We needed to come up with some really clear and efficient ways that a partner brand could get the value of that. So Kitchen OS kind of extends at one end to firmware. So we've standardized the firmware. So that's the technology that goes into the physical appliance that allows it to talk to the internet. We developed a cloud infrastructure, which enables us to scale, and that's where our kind of core cooking system lives. And then we developed some core concepts around how we model appliances. And then from there, we're able to build consumer experiences. So we build mobile apps, and that takes advantage of all of our understanding about the cooking system and appliances. And we've also built a CMS, and that CMS is completely integrated. So when you work with Fresco, you get everything out of the box. So everything from firmware to CMS to cooking system to mobile apps to analytics.
And by CMS, so people don't know and understand the term CMS, it's the content management system. So where you're inputting recipes and descriptive technology around cooking that ultimately the consumer is consuming.
Exactly. So it's a content management system, and this is actually one of the most challenging areas, I think, for appliance brands when they try to go smart. And what we've observed is often this gets very technical, and it means recipes are almost written as code so they can talk to a particular appliance. And we'd learnt, through our own experience that was not the path to actually building a truly connected kitchen. And so what we've built in our CMS, because this was part of our original design, you can take any recipe. So you could go into our CMS today and you could create a recipe in the way that you'd expect. add your ingredients, add your steps, and you can make that smart recipe in seconds because we've defined those capabilities within our smart system. So suddenly, for a partner, they can take their existing recipe catalog and make it smart. And that's, I think, a fundamental difference in terms of how KitchenOS has approached the challenges than where we were before.
Imagine the challenge for someone like yourself is saying, hey, you're working with brand A, brand B, brand C. They all have essentially siloed technology stacks. How do you work with these different folks? And are they agreeable to this saying, hey, we think a unifying framework can be a Fresco?
Yes. So I think the interoperability or the orchestration across appliances is now being understood, and we're hearing that in direct feedback from a range of different brands within the industry.
There's a big challenge in kind of unifying across a variety of different siloed tech stacks. And so you guys are going to be that unifying software framework. So A, it sounds like it's difficult, and B, you need the buy-in from the different brands. And so it sounds like you're working on both those fronts.
Yes, exactly. So that's a good way of describing it. We're working on at least a couple of fronts. So what we already have in market today is a fully end-to-end, out-of-the-box solution. And so if you haven't already started your smart journey, then we can help you. And that goes back to the point around everything from firmware, everything through the cloud, everything through CMS, and a really nice cooking experience. That's really what we've optimized for over the last 18 months. And so if you've been standing on the edges or not ready to commit to a smart strategy, then in one vendor in Fresco, then we have that solution for you. And just to go slightly deeper on that, the way that we have built our architecture and our understanding of cooking capabilities means that we can bring you onto our platform in as little as 2 weeks. And this was one of our kind of really quite ambitious goals a couple of years ago, because before that it would take maybe up to a year. And Fresco's involved in conversations at the factory level and lots of back and forth and redesigning parts of the system. But we recognized for it to be a platform, we had to bring in standards. And so there are about 100 general capabilities across the kitchen. We've modeled most of those now. And what that means is if you're a partner and you come along and say, hey, I've got this appliance, if that already matches what we have on KitchenOS, then we're kind of out of your way in 2 weeks. So we'll have you completely modeled, which means that we have a digital representation of that appliance. We'll have built you an app, which won't be connected because the appliance hasn't been manufactured yet. And that's hugely different. And that is really exciting a lot of potential partners in the market, because the alternative is you do it yourself. And often these companies don't have strong in-house software skills. It's not their background. So they have to build that, or they have to take it out of and outsource it. And then they end up with multiple vendors. And it becomes pretty complicated then to manage not just the release of a new product, but then how do you maintain that and scale that over time?
You said that you're hearing from appliance brands you're talking to that there's buy-in around the concept of interoperability. And so maybe you could speak to that and what some of the things you're hearing, because I think that when I look at a lot of the efforts by the countertop guys and the large appliance manufacturers, some of them have scaled back their efforts around building connected appliances, after 5 years of kind of disappointing results. So I think we're at kind of the precipice of maybe a new wave of interest in the space. That's kind of what I'm hearing. But what are you hearing from them in terms of lessons learned and maybe what they're thinking this time around in terms of different approaches?
So I think those who've tried it before, some have been very successful. I think there's some great examples out there. But the thing that's common to all of them is that they're kind of like little private islands, and so they can't talk to other appliances. And I think most people, it's probably fair to say, most people don't live in a home with a kitchen where all the appliances are from one brand.
Right.
And so, we really think hard about this orchestration part, because when it works, it feels like magic. And we often see that they're not necessarily competing appliances either. So we work with Kenwood. They're our sort of OG partner, to use that term. And that they're, for those who aren't familiar with Kenwood, maybe in the States, their stand mixer is one of their primary products. They also have food processors. So many of those recipes need to be completed in an oven. And so there's a great example where we take a stand mixer recipe, and then often the recipe will say preheat the oven at the beginning. As I said, in a couple of seconds, you can just make that a bake capability. Our platform understands it, and suddenly that's a smart baking recipe forever. So we see appliance manufacturers who see those natural kind of overlaps with other brands, and they can see how that really can work for them. I think it opens up the door as well to all sorts of interesting co-marketing opportunities that they can have there. So
I remember meeting with Ben Harris at the Housewares show, I think 2017 or 2018, and that's when he showed off that Kenwood early integration. So I think that was around the time of that. So yeah, you definitely been working with a lot of manufacturers for some time. Other brands you guys worked with, they think include Thermomix. You guys worked with them in the past, and certainly Panasonic was one of your most recent ones where you announced, I think this is the first line of connected microwaves from a Panasonic. You guys are helping to correct me if I'm wrong there, but you guys are working with them in the U.S. market. They're one of the largest manufacturers of microwaves in the world, and you're doing a integration with the Panasonic microwave, right?
Well, in fact, yes. So that we were delighted to announce that at CES just last month. It's actually a 4-in-1 connected oven, and so it's a microwave, an air fryer, a broiler, and a convection. It can convection bake. Now, the really interesting thing about that, and I think one of the great advantages of Smart from an appliance manufacturer point of view is, one of the challenges they often have is how do you convey to the consumer all the different capabilities and all the things that you can achieve with that machine. And microwaves are particularly interesting because I think, again, not to overgeneralize, but if you're in Japan, people understand microwaves and they really know how to use them and to create a whole array of different types of cooking. But in Europe and North America, I think, again, I'm slightly generalizing, but it's add another minute, put your popcorn in, take it out, is it warm? So actually, microwaves are incredibly flexible cooking machines. But how do you convey that? How do you share that? How do you teach your consumers? And the way that we see that working is actually through recipes. It's as simple as that. So you shouldn't have to worry about, I don't know how that part of the program. And microwaves, by the way, are particularly complex kind of UIs built into them. But imagine you can just open a Panasonic recipe app and you can see delicious meals and you just know it's going to work. And that's really the power, I think, of smart cooking and guided cooking that we help them with.
And this is coming at a time where I see a trend towards more what I call mashup cooking appliances, right? So, you talked about the 4-in-1 from Panasonic. We saw at CES some folks announcing essentially mashup boxers. They're maybe integrating steam or they're integrating microwave with different types of heating as well. So I think maybe one of the benefits of having some sort of overlying software that's powering the cooking experience is to seamlessly switch between the different cooking modes during the course of a recipe bake or cook, because you might need some microwave for thawing, and then you may need some steam, and then you might need etc. So it's that seamless mixing between the different cooking modalities within the making of a meal that I think Smart could bring some benefits to.
I completely agree. So we saw this. So one of the things I was personally involved in the Panasonic work in the sort of 6 months before CES. And what we did there, we did a large in-home study in 30 homes in America. And we put a prototype 4-in-1 connected oven in there. And that's exactly what you could see. So, if you're trying to explain to somebody, hey, you can use these capabilities and chain them together, that's actually quite complicated. And in many ways, they shouldn't need to know how that works. But you can write a recipe in the Fresco CMS that takes advantage of those capabilities and puts them together. And suddenly you've got cooking outcomes that you didn't know you could achieve within that type of appliance. You've touched on something really interesting there, which is these appliances that are now becoming more multi-capability. And one of the things that we intentionally designed into Kitchen OS was once we understand a capability fully, then we can sort of bring those together. So just as by way of an example, I use the term modeling, that means we kind of bake in the concept of microwave into the platform. And we also have broil. And maybe with another partner, we initially did bake. Then suddenly you've got this very flexible toolkit where those things are on KitchenOS. So if you come along to us with an appliance that does not A, B, and C, but D, E, and F, then if we have those things there, then you're also part of that 2-week onboarding timeline.
Let's talk a little bit about consumers. I think one of the challenges in the space is consumers are very hard to change their behavior. They get fixed in their habits. You talk about Americans and microwaves. Like many people have been doing the same push button 30 seconds plus for like 2 decades, 3 decades of their life. What you don't want to do is create more kind of technical complications or kind of tax for people in the cooking experience. So I think bringing value to them with technology, but not making their lives more difficult is like one of the key balances that a company like you and your partners are trying to get through. But how do you work through that and bring them and convince them to use this technology?
That's a great question, and that consumes a lot of our thinking. So you're exactly right there, because you described. In fact, it's not like maintain the level of complexity. We certainly can't make it higher. This only works if we reduce complexity. And so the types of problems that we see consumers, I think, globally talk about is a lack of time, or a lack of confidence, or just a bit fatigued with cooking. So everything that we do is really designed around how do we address those challenges. And so everything we do in thinking about that home cook is, we do quite a lot of research, is to understand what are the things people are trying to do every single day, and do we have room to make those things even simpler.
Let's future cast a little bit and look where this is going. I think certainly one of the big macro trends we're observing pretty closely is just the bringing of AI into all the different parts of the food system. And we're certainly seeing it in the consumer kitchen. You guys are working heavily on that. What are some of the ways in which you think AI powered cooking will change consumers' experiences over the next decade?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really exciting time, and but the way we think about it is these problems, these universal problems that the home cook has. So time, confidence, feeling limited in their repertoire. We look at these technologies and just think, how does it help solve those problems? So it's not AI in itself; it's more how does it help the everyday cook? Because that's where the opportunity and that's where the value for the home cook is. So initially, it began with IoT, so smart cooking, and we call that the Fresco Smart Assistant. But with AI, what we're seeing and what we're excited about, particularly with generative AI, is how do you take that smart assistant a step further? And that means, how do we help you in the here and now? Right now, when I'm cooking, and I have a doubt, I have a query, how can we help you? So there are a couple of things that we're working on right now, and one of them we call Adapt. And so this is the idea, and I certainly face this. I'm certainly not a master chef. When you're cooking, you suddenly realise, oh, I didn't buy that thing at the grocery store, or I thought I had it in the cupboard and it's actually run out. And I often find myself shouting to my wife, who's a much better cook than me, and can I use something instead of something else? And so this idea of having much more dynamic recipe substitution is a great example, I think. And often it's not just saying, well, replace this and put that in. Depending on the ingredient swap, it might change the texture of the meal. It might change the cooking time. So all of that has to be thought about. Or the ability to take a recipe and say, well, actually, I'd like to see this as a vegetarian option. So rather than have to search for another recipe, can you make those changes? So that's adaptation. And that needs to be really responsive in real time when you need it in the kitchen. And then I think allied to that is this idea of, am I doing it well? Is it right? What does Juliana carrot mean? Or how do I do that particular technique? And so we call that kind of class of problem assist. And so again, right now, I don't want to be stressed in the kitchen. I might feel as though I don't have confidence to do certain things. Can we help in that space as well? And so that's where I see AI coming in. And again, one of the sort of future-looking aspects of KitchenOS was thinking about how the system could extend to new technologies. And we're seeing that now with AI. So we're doing quite a lot of work with large language models, and we're augmenting that with our own sort of proprietary cooking data. So we're really thinking about AI, but with a very strong cooking knowledge.
I think some of the platform players I've heard of in the food system are using existing large language models. I know what you're doing if you're working with OpenAI or Google's large language models, but talk about like that augmentation or the plugging in of specific domain knowledge. Like with the case of Fresco, that would be the cooking information that you built, your ontologies, your data. You're obviously
Yeah.
guardrailing the knowledge, the kind of the general purpose knowledge within a large language model with like a cooking specific data. So talk about how you're building those integrations just at a high level for people trying to understand how they can take generative AI built on top of like existing $1 billion large language models and make us a very kind of useful technology framework for their specific application.
Yeah, so we work with, we've researched many of the different LLMs. So we've looked at a number from all sorts of companies you'd expect to talk about, but we really are working hard to try to confine that really within the cooking space. So we're really careful about that. I was just trying to think last week. There was trying to think who it was. Was it a delivery service in the States, which was kind of very open-ended? There was an AI chatbot that you could ask any question to, and then suddenly it went off on a rambling spiel about the company and what it should and shouldn't be doing. So that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. And so we won't build tools that aren't specifically around the cooking experience. That's more about us understanding what are the power of these large language models, and then how do we constrain them around where we have confidence in their knowledge. And then what we built in Kitchen OS, and this is the work we started a couple of years ago, was building this. We call it a knowledge graph, but it's really a semantic understanding of all the concepts within cooking. So ingredients. So a simple way of thinking about that is rather than just a list of ingredients, those ingredients have meaning. So they fall within categories of ingredients. They use standard identifiers, so you could plug them into nutritional databases. And we've done the same thing with preparations and those cooking capabilities. So when you bring all of that together and think about how do we constrain the problem to within the cooking space, then the goal there is to really have something that's very focused and reliable, I guess, is what we're trying to do. The home cook shouldn't know that this is AI. It should just feel like this thing works and it's magic, and it doesn't take you off on random journeys into other spaces.
What are you guys thinking about with regards to what I think some people are calling now precision nutrition? We called, personalized nutrition. I think one of the big interesting trends where I think I see worlds converging is how can we help people become better cooks and do meal planning, but also then maybe help them make more precise and personalized meals that also maybe in some way can help them on their health path. And maybe at some level, kind of looking into the future, maybe we can build meal planning around what my personal health risks are, my biomarkers are. Are you guys thinking about that in a future context? Are you guys working on something today?
I wouldn't say we're looking particularly closely at that example today, but I definitely see that in the future. So really, the story of Fresco over the last couple of years with Kitchen OS is definitely everything we're doing is moving towards personalization, because cooking is very personal, different tastes, different preferences, different cuisines. So everything that we do is actually moving in that direction. So the AI examples I talked about there were, my problems right now, help me out. And I referenced there this knowledge graph, and the underlying technologies are enable us, because I think I used the example of ingredients having sort of industry standard references. So Parmesan cheese has meaning. It isn't just a label that says Parmesan cheese. That means that you can then use those standards and integrate other data. So it could be from the FDA or whoever would be neutral about that. And that's the basis or the building blocks then to start thinking about how nutritional experiences can come together. And so whether that's your personal targets or goals around macros, or within the ecosystem that we're building, you could bring in contributors or creators in a nutritional space. So all of those things I see as being in front of us, things that make sense, because cooking is it's intensely personal, really. I would say the next 2 years, it's really about taking Kitchen OS and the core concepts and bringing more appliance manufacturers into the smart space, because again, that then talks to orchestration. And orchestration today, if you think about appliances, maybe doing one aspect of a meal planning requires more than one aspect, more than one dish, and so that orchestration piece becomes important. But I can definitely see all the pieces are pointing in the right direction over the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, this has been great, Anthony. Enjoyed hearing about the Fresco journey. Where can people find out more about what Fresco is doing?
So frescocooks.com is our URL. We're just doing a minor refresh of that, actually, which is another project I'm involved in right now. So we're going to have that ready before KBIS in a couple of weeks. We'll talk a bit more about Kitchen OS and some of the solutions we have for the industry there.
All right. And I will be at KBIS. For those of you who don't know, that is the Kitchen to Bath show in Las Vegas. I'm going back to Las Vegas. I can't believe it after spending a big chunk of my January there. So, but maybe I'll see you there, Anthony. And thank you so much for spending time with me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the time to chat about these things. Thank you, Michael.
All right, that's it. If you're the type of person that enjoys deep, nerdy conversations about enabling technology for future kitchen, smart home, this was your podcast. I try to make everyone happy, serve all constituencies here on the Spoon Podcast. As you heard, we recorded the conversation before KBIS, and at KBIS, the folks from Fresco had some big news. They are partnering with Middleby, the company behind appliance brand Viking, and I caught up with the CEO of Fresco, Ben Harris, and you could catch that interview at the Spoon. We will be back next week. I had a podcast interview with the CEO of Mill, Matt Rogers. That was great. We talked about his background, helping to co-found Nest, and then why he decided to go into the kitchen and help us all reduce our food waste with the Mill food recycler. So that was a good one. We also have a food tech news show coming up that we're recording tomorrow. So if you want to listen in and hear what our thoughts are on some of the latest headlines, you'll want to check that one out as well. That's it for now. We'll talk to you soon.